Chapter 13. The last 2 weeks of Morn passed busily, if uneventfully, as the training exercises, both in and out of barracks, continued. 3 evenings after what the Queen ruefully referred to as her lapse, Leonard was finally inducted into the spacebender's fearsome art of the evocation of mind demons. Before they started, Queen Neruda had fixed her compelling gaze on Zand and Leonard, and insisted that they both gave her the assurance that they would never use its fearsomely destructive potential, unless utterly compelled to do so by circumstances. When both had given her this solemn undertaking, she took a deep breath and initiated the exercise. And though forewarned and prepared, Anmar and Dane had never experienced anything more utterly terrifying or disorientating. It went so far beyond the normal ability of the Lhounds to project disturbing images into mind space when they chose to, like Zand had done to drive off the she-wolves on the lower plains plateau, that the two skills could barely be compared. When they walked back to their quarters afterwards, they both looked at Leonard with new eyes. As the Queen had remarked soberly after normality had been restored and everybody had regained their equilibrium somewhat, Leonard showed great aptitude for this particular aspect of the spacebender's chilling craft. Zand's mind-send and congratulatory growl held both warmth and exultant savagery as he revelled in his handler's unexpected mastery at this, the spacebender's most dangerous and destructive skill. As Zendra's puppies were now completely weaned and had evolved into tireless little eating machines and drinkers of copious amounts of rich lowland cow's milk, she started joining in the training exercises. As was the norm, to allow Lound mothers to resume their working lives, the puppies now spend most of the day with the 3 patiently loving Lound foster mothers, in company with 4 other pups of similar age. Zendra still spent all the time she was not training or working with them, often in company with Anmar, and they still slept in their nursing cubicle with their mother at night. Anmar kept a very close eye on Zendra during the training exercises. So did Zand. On the initial day that they did serious road training with Zendra along, he was the first one to notice that she was getting tired, and Mind called, "Anmar, Zendra should turn back now." Anmar immediately spurred Nightwind up alongside the Queen, who, having picked up Zand's sending, was already turning towards her. "Yes, take her home now, Anmar, at a nice, easy speed," she said. Though initially reluctant to go back, Anmar sensed that Zendra was relieved to be going home. They set a leisurely pace back, and quite enjoyed what soon turned into a pleasant excursion. Zendra even indulged in a playful chase after a red reed hare that foolishly ventured out of the lush growth around a farmer's irrigation dam close to the road, though the speedy creature soon eluded her. But Zendra's fitness improved rapidly. She went further with each training session, and by the end of Morn was holding her own with the others. Zand had subtly appointed himself her protector. He kept close to her during the training and rest periods, and Leonard wondered if he was the only one who had noticed that the big Lound always positioned himself between Major Ram and Zendra. And on the first full training exercise that Zendra completed, Zand did not take off on his final full-out dash for home, but stayed alongside Zendra, completing the day's exercise sedately for him. This set the regular pattern thereafter, much to the disappointment of a number of the young Lounds, who were sure that they could have caught Zand, given time. Leonard also wondered, and hoped, that he was the only one who noticed that there was just the subtlest of subtle changes in Zand's demeanour towards Major Ram. It could not in any way be construed as insubordination or even arrogance, just something in the briefest of a split second that Zand took longer to move out of the Major's way, the careful way in which the Lound positioned himself between the Major and Zendra, the merest fraction of a second longer that the inscrutable golden eyes lingered on the Major in their normal lazy sweep of the environment. Major Ram was more than likely completely unaware of it. Not that there was ever any danger of another unfortunate situation developing between Zand and the Major, for the Queen now led every exercise. On the only 2 occasions that she could not do so, word was sent that everybody should use the time in weapons drill. Anmar was pleased about the extra opportunities. She handled the stun sword well by now, but still had a long way to go to reach the level of proficiency that true masters like Leonard and Major Tarek displayed in the use of the deadly weapon. The news about the attack on Bagnor Deep 1 arrived on the last day of the first week of the moon of Cadiz. The 2 couriers, a slight young man and an even smaller young woman, dressed in the dark blue Royal Courier Service uniform, were grey with fatigue when they were shown to the Queen's table in the refectory. Anmar noticed them immediately and briefly touched Leonard's arm where they were sharing a small table some distance, from where councillors Admeta and Rade were having luncheon with the Queen. "Bad news, I fear," she said under her breath. The Queen obviously came to the same conclusion. She was on her feet before the two couriers had even reached her table. She took each one of them by the arm. "Come," she said, "my audience room immediately." As she led them out of the dining hall, followed by the two councillors, she instructed one of the servers, "Bring some food and drink to my room as quickly as you can, please." She also sent an urgent, "Join us, please," to Lhounds and Anmar. When they reached the Queen's audience chamber, the Queen and the two councillors were seated at the table already. Queen Eruda indicated that Lhounds and Anmar should sit down. "The couriers are just using my ablution facilities. They will be here forthwith," she said. Shortly thereafter they were joined by the two couriers, looking slightly refreshed, though still very tired. They had barely sat down before the servers arrived from the kitchen with 2 trays, each containing a plate piled high with food, cutlery, serviette, a glass, and a large frosty beaker of rose apple juice. As they placed these in front of the couriers, the Queen said, "Eat, please. What you have to tell me can wait until you are no longer faint with thirst and hunger." The Queen activated the room shields after having asked one of the servers to pass on instructions that quarters be prepared for the couriers. The young female courier just poured and thirstily drank a glass of the juice before she started talking. "Your Highness, my name is Anir. This is my brother Talon. We always work as a team. We take turns actually sleeping in the saddle, so we hardly ever stop except to eat and pick up relays. We come from mine manager Mitros Jarek at Bagnor 1. He wrote a report, but asked us to tell you in person first. Here is his seal and the report." The young woman pulled a heavily embossed sheet of heavy rush parchment, along with a thick envelope from the thin dispatch case she wore slung across her back, and gave them to the Queen. As the Queen glanced at it, the young courier fell silent and started eating ravenously. Her brother also dealt with a significant part of his food before putting down his fork and beginning the narrative. "Bagnor 1 was attacked, Your Highness, on the 28th day of morn." Incredulous shockwaves passed around the table. Then the Queen looked from the young man to her sister. "But that means that you have covered more than 3,200 parsecs in a staggeringly fast 10 days, she exclaimed in amazement. "Yes, Your Highness," the young man agreed. "They had some really good horses at the way stations this time," he said as he started eating again. "And having so many more way stations nowadays helps, of course, Your Highness," his sister added matter-of-factly, clearing the last morsel of food off her plate in remarkably quick time. When her brother also set his cutlery aside and drained the last of his juice, the Queen said, "Now, tell me everything." "Your Highness," Talon began soberly, "the news is very bad, I am afraid. The attack on the mine happened early in the morning of the 28th of the last moon, when the day workers were supposed to go on duty. The 6 men and 4 women left their living quarters in the staff accommodation in the workers' village, which, as you may know, is about 2 parsecs from the mine." The Queen nodded and said, "Yes, I know. The air around the mine is still too contaminated with the harmful fibers of the rock that the crystals are found in to make it advisable for the workers to live any closer to the mine." "Indeed, Your Highness," Talon continued. "So after their early breakfast, the day workers went to the ablution block where they always change into their working suits before getting their horses from the stables and riding to the mine. When they got to the ablution block, they were ambushed, and all were killed." Talon hesitated a moment before adding, "They all had their throats cut." Shock and revulsion sounded clearly in the young voice. This was, of course, only discovered later. The 2 stable boys must have been dead already. The attackers then dressed in the mine workers' working clothes. You know they all wear those loose, roomy, safety fabric coveralls, and those heavy helmets and face masks that are fitted with those bulky air cleaners that make it safe to breathe in the mine. Talon looked at the others around the table and gestured around his neck to explain. "The helmets fasten onto these magnetic metal collars that the working suits are fitted with, and then also screw onto them with wing nuts. Everybody looks the same when they have these things on. So nobody at the mine stables or in the security room at the entrance to the mine apparently noticed anything wrong. The day workers mumbled good morning, handed in their security tokens, and trudged into the mine to replace the workers that were due to come off duty. The night workers coming off duty apparently left the mine a bit later than normal. One of them grumbled something through his breathing apparatus about another one of Band's bloody hold-ups, but nobody paid much attention because everything seemed to be in order. The workers were duly given their new security tokens for the next day, and then, as normal, they picked up the horses from the stables to return to the village. And that, Your Highness, is the last anybody saw of them." Talon fixed troubled eyes on the Queen. His sister smoothly took over the account. "So somewhere, in the 2 parsecs between Bagnor 1 and the workers' village, the attackers disappeared. And with them, I am afraid, Your Highness," Anir said, clearly hesitant to impart this latter piece of news, "the entire 4 moons' production of Bagnor 1's crystals." Councillor Admeta was the first to give verbal expression to the consternation felt by everybody. "What? But how is that possible? All the crystals are locked in a strong room, down in the mine. Each crystal of the day's production is individually sealed in those little Isenplex capsules that isolates them, and then they are put through a narrow slot in the door of the strong room. All this is done under the supervision of the 2 armed security guards on duty, and every 4 moons the strong room is emptied by the mine manager himself, again under armed guard. And then the crystals are brought here, again under heavily armed guard." The Queen had been watching Anir's face. "Wait, Admeta," she now said with a lifted hand. "There is more to this." Anir looked clearly upset when she imparted the next bit of news. "You know that there are 2 keys to the strong room, Your Highness. One is carried by Manager Jarek himself, and the other by the assistant mine manager, Garman Tarp." The Queen nodded wordlessly. Anir looked at her brother, and he supplied the next bit of information. "They found Master Tarp's body in his house later that day, Your Highness. They had cut off his hand to remove the cuff and chain that his key was fastened to." Talon imparted this appalling news in a hushed voice. "So the attackers must have had his key with them when they pretended to be the day workers and went into the mine. They unlocked the strong room and removed all the crystals," Talon concluded. "Which would not have been a huge amount," Councillor Admeta interjected. "Bagnor 1's production tends to be significantly lower than Bagnor 2's. It would have been quite easy to hide them in those loose coveralls, possibly even in their boots or gloves. There were, after all, 10 of the miscreants, weren't there?" she concluded savagely. There were sounds of shocked agreement from around the table. After a brief pause, Anir resumed the account. "Manager Jarek thinks that they must have had more weapons hidden in the mine, probably smuggled in with the last consignments of bamboo for shoring up the tunnels, because all of the night workers already on shift, and 1 of the 2 security guards were killed, stabbed to death in fact. The other security guard had not arrived for work during the night, and 2 other security guards, comprising the other security team that had worked earlier in the night, also disappeared." Councillor Rade looked baffled, so Talon explained. "The security guards' work periods do not overlap with those of the other workers. They are replaced every 4 hours so that they will be alert at all times." Councillor Rade nodded her head to show that she understood. "Manager Jarek is convinced that the 3 missing security guards must have been involved in the whole business," Talon concluded somberly. Anir drained the last of her juice, then continued the grim narrative. "And Your Highness, the first time that anybody found out that anything was wrong was quite a bit later that morning, when the serving staff in the dining room at the workers' village wondered why the night workers were not arriving for their breakfast. They waited quite a while before investigating, because the workers coming off duty often take fairly long to arrive at the dining hall. They first used the facilities in the ablution block close to the stables, to bathe and change into their ordinary clothes. Apparently, getting out of their working clothes is also quite time-consuming, what with the helmets that have to come off and everything. Then, before coming to breakfast, the workers also spend a good while inspecting their coveralls to make sure that they have not been damaged during the night's work. Apparently, the smallest rip can make the difference between staying healthy and getting really sick in the toxic atmosphere in the mine. So it was only when 2 of the servers eventually went to the stables and the ablution block to investigate that they discovered the dead bodies of the day workers and the 2 stable boys. So only then was the alarm raised. Both of them raced off to the mine on 2 of the spare horses, raised the alarm at the gates, and when they were allowed in, burst into Manager Jarek's office in an absolute state of panic. They were so upset that the guards at the gate had to rush after them with breathing masks." Anir stopped talking, clearly still deeply affected by what had happened. Her brother resumed the account. "And so the whole horrible business was discovered during the rest of the day. The dead night workers down in the mine, the dead security guard alongside them, Assistant Manager Tarp's dead and mutilated body, and of course the fact that the whole 4 moons' production of crystals had been stolen. Talon also paused and clearly braced himself for the last part of the shocking recital. It was really, really dreadful at the mine, Your Highness, especially where there were families involved. People were fainting and screaming and crying and getting completely hysterical. The 2 medics and their nurse aides had a terrible time trying to calm everybody down, whilst they were in a shocked state themselves. Talon sat shaking his head, then reached across to take his sister's hand in his. Manager Jarek stayed up all night writing his report, and we left well before daybreak as soon as he was finished. To be honest, Your Highness, we were glad to get away, he concluded in a low voice. By now the brief boost of energy that the food and drink had given to the 2 young couriers was starting to wear off, and they were beginning to look completely worn down again. The Queen got up decisively. Anir and Talon, I thank you very much for the incredible achievement of getting here in such an amazingly short time. I will now go through Manager Jarek's report while you 2 get some well-deserved rest. Sleep as long as you like. Don't be concerned about meal times. We will see that you get food whenever you need it. These words were also addressed to Miller, who had just arrived at the Queen's summons to take the couriers to their quarters. Please see that Mr. San in the kitchen is informed, Miller, the Queen requested. The brother and sister got stiffly to their feet, thanked the Queen, and then followed Miller from the room, weariness now visibly dragging at every line of their slight young bodies. When the double doors closed behind them, the Queen wordlessly activated the room shields and sat down heavily in her chair. For a moment she allowed her face to rest in her cupped hands, stressed fingers rubbing her forehead. When she raised her head, her face was drawn and paler than normal. "People," she said, "now what do we do? I must admit that this has hit me like a shaft of lightning from a cloudless sky." The room was silent for a significant period of time as everybody wrestled with the dreadful news that the couriers had brought, the only sound the turning of pages as the Queen rapidly read through the mine manager's report. "In essence, nothing new here, just more harrowing details," she finally said in a bleak voice as she laid the document down on the table. "Manager Jarek does say that he is also sending couriers to Bagnor too, just to warn them to be alert, which under the circumstances shows great presence of mind, I think. Oh, and he does mention that the armed escort for bringing the past 4 moons crystals here to Gordofane was due to arrive the day after the attack, and that under the circumstances he proposes keeping them there for added security, in case there is another attack," she added. Leonard leant forward and said in a definite voice, "There won't be one, Your Highness, or at least not until there is a stock of crystals again. They got what they came for, the crystals." Councillor Admeta affirmed this vehemently. "I completely agree, and I do not think for a moment that the timing was simply fortuitous. They knew that the crystals were due to be sent here the very next day. This was very, very carefully planned, and clearly with help from inside the mine." Councillor Admeta's voice was tight with anger. "You are both entirely correct, of course," Queen Aruda agreed. "This is getting very bad very quickly. Apart from the loss of life and the untold suffering that this attack on the mine has caused, as well as the loss of the crystals that I do not even want to dwell on at this stage, there is a horrifyingly dark element that I think is becoming more and more apparent. It is woven like a thick thread of sickening and frightening evil through so much that has happened. What I am talking about is a total disregard for human life, such as I have never encountered in my adult life before. Let me sum up quickly. When the young Lhounds were stolen in Lanatek 2 years ago, the trainers who were with them were killed, seemingly without any compunction. The people in the bamboo forest were callously left defenseless against the Deathstalkers and the Tox Lizards when their tunnels were removed, and their entire security system compromised. Where the forest dwellers got in the way of whoever was removing the tunnels, they were all summarily killed, no mercy, no exception. Leonard and his whole party were condemned to die terrible deaths on the plateau. Again, no qualms, no scruples. And now, at the mine, the same utter disregard for human life. Everybody is killed as the easiest, least problematical, safest solution to the problem." Anmar had been nodding her head as the Queen spoke. When the Queen fell silent, she said, "Yes, Your Highness, that is exactly the quality I sensed in the mind of that sender in Rekkel. His mind was not just dark, but also, as you said, somehow empty of feeling, almost as if he were so focused on whatever he was trying to achieve, that everything else, emotions included, were simply irrelevant, unimportant, non-existent even." Zand also sensed it and was perturbed by it. Leonard agreed. "I know, Zand told me so as well. But what I have been really concerned about as well is what happened to that sender. We suspect that he is the one who was crossing the plateaus ahead of us and destroyed the hut. But where is he now? Is he here in Gordofane? If he is here, where is he? What is he doing? Is he in contact with anybody? I have asked Zan to be alert for his mental signature, but he has not found a trace of him. The Queen nodded. So have I, in fact. I lifted his mental signature from Zan's mind and confirmed it from Anmar's, but I have not detected the faintest trace of him in Mindspace. Nor have I, Anmar sighed, but then I suspect that he is capable of locking his mind so tightly that no one will even guess that he is a telepath. Councillor Admeta now re-entered the discussion. So he could be right here in the palace and we would not even know it? She sounded downright horrified. Queen Iruda and Anmar both shook their heads thoughtfully. I don't think so, Admeta, the Queen responded. Hiding your telepathic abilities full-time in what is essentially a telepathic community would be very hard, particularly with powerful telepaths like yourself, Leonard, Anmar, Alan Radde and Padam around, not to mention Zand and myself, of course. The Queen looked very thoughtful, but then shook her head decisively. But all this is not getting us any closer to a decision as to what our immediate action should be now, she said, and looked at the 4 people around the table. At first, nobody spoke. Then Leonard said almost abruptly, With respect, ma'am, I think we should move the departure date of our expedition forward. I think we should leave now, or as soon as we can. The Queen stared at him fixedly for a few moments, then nodded slowly. You are right, of course. Nothing is achieved by waiting around here. We have to find out, if at all possible, what is going on so that we can devise some strategy of dealing with it. Again, if at all possible. I am deeply concerned about all of this, and I must be honest and admit that I am not sure that we can deal with whatever it is. If the suspicions that I have been harbouring for some time prove to be true, and Grelin forfend that it be so, we are headed for a desperate struggle that I am not at all sure we can win, though I will not admit that to anybody else apart from the people in this room. Queen Iruda's face was set and grim as she spoke. Councillor Radde spoke hesitantly, concern clearly colouring her voice. Your Highness, what are these suspicions that you have? You've mentioned them before, but you have never explained what they are. Queen Iruda leant back in her chair with an agitated exhalation of breath. That's because the suspicions that I have are largely unfounded, Radde, and are almost entirely based on old fears and feelings of premonition that I have not been able to shake off. I have shared these with my son, but I would at this stage prefer not to pass them on to anybody else, at least not until I have a little bit more to substantiate them. I sincerely hope that I am just being foolishly fearful and overly imaginative at the moment. The Queen was clearly frustrated and perturbed by the dilemma in which she found herself. Councillors Radde and Admeta looked at each other and then at the Queen. Foolishly fearful and overly imaginative are not terms that I would use in any description of you, my Queen, Councillor Admeta said slowly. For some moments the Queen was still deeply sunk in her sombre thoughts, but soon visibly pulled herself together. Enough of that, she said forcefully. We have decisions to make. She consulted her timepiece and stood up briskly. There is still enough time to have a meeting with everybody concerned. I want to leave before the noon hour tomorrow, if at all possible. Within minutes she had issued instructions to several aides, who rushed off to do her bidding. Within the hour, Governor Demito, Count Edo, Major Ram, Colonel Malek, Major Tarek and Scribe Allen had joined the group already assembled in the Queen's audience chamber, and been made privy to the news and the appalling details about the attack on Bagnor Deep 1. For some time an understandably fraught and fairly chaotic discussion followed, as everybody expressed their shock and horror at the brutality of the attack, and the highly unfortunate loss of the rare and badly needed crystals. Queen Iruda allowed the debate to continue unchecked for quite a while, as she knew that it was important for people to express their concerns and feelings, thus unburdening their spirits and coming to terms with the event. In view of the time constraints, however, the Queen called the meeting to order sooner than she would normally have done, and presented them with the suggestion that in view of the attack, the departure date of the expedition be moved forward as much as possible. Everybody felt that this made extremely good sense. Governor Demito and Colonel Malek felt that it was also important under the circumstances that a significantly bigger force be sent on the expedition. Apart from making it safer for everybody concerned, Your Highness, you can then reinforce Bagnor 1's security on your way, and also send a similar force onto Bagnor 2 to do the same there. Colonel Malek pointed out. Major Ram felt just as strongly that sending a bigger force was not a good option, as taking people and animals along who had not participated in the strenuous training exercises in preparation for the expedition would inevitably slow them down. "I am sure you would agree, ma'am, that time is of the essence now," he concluded forcefully. Major Ram did, however, pick up on Colonel Malek's very good advice about reinforcing the security at Bagnor too, as we simply cannot afford to lose any more crystals, can we? He therefore suggested that a small advance party of hand-picked militia archers and handlers and their Lhounds be sent off that very evening already to travel as light and as fast as they could to reinforce security at Bagnor too. "And may I be so bold as to advise that this advance party be led by Captain Denarian, ma'am, who we know is a very seasoned campaigner and able to set a very fast pace." Major Ram sat back in his chair with the confident air of someone who had made such an eminently sensible suggestion that it would inevitably be accepted. Queen Neruda studied Major Ram's stern, uncompromising face for a few long seconds, then said thoughtfully, "Now that is indeed a sound suggestion, Major Ram. As you say, the sooner we get some added security at Bagnor too, the better. But I am afraid that I cannot spare Captain Denarian. I want him and Zand with me. Now let me think. Ah, yes, I know. I'll get Captain Hernan of my personal guard to head up this advance party. He is always supremely fit and is a very dynamic leader. I'll also send Sergeant Narik and young Corporal Dalek with him, as well as those 2 fiery young lieutenants of yours, Nellen. What are their names again?" Nellen Tarek smiled. "Oh, you mean the twins Oxala and Shanna Ire, ma'am. Yes, they would be perfect for this. They are both superb horsewomen, and handle stun swords as if they are simply extensions of their arms. Oxala's good with a crossbow, too." The Queen gave a satisfied nod. "Good, that's our complement from the Lhound regiment decided then. Or did you want a bigger advance party, Major Ram? And perhaps you would prefer to lead it yourself?" Queen Neruda watched Major Ram's face keenly. The Major shook his head. "No, ma'am, that sounds fine to me. I will decide our 5 archers in consultation with Count Edo after the meeting." The Queen lifted a hand. "No, Major, let's decide on them right now. Then we can notify them straight away. I want to brief them as soon as they can get here, after which they can get ready, have an early supper, and be on their way forthwith. Count Edo, any suggestions?" Count Edo pursed his lips thoughtfully, then suggested 5 names that the Queen, after a few moments' thought, agreed to immediately. She turned to her scribe and instructed that aides be sent to summon the appointed Lhound regiment and militia members of the advance party. Leonard wondered if it was his imagination that Major Ram was skillfully hiding an intense feeling of annoyance. By the end of the afternoon, however, all the necessary decisions had been taken. It had of necessity entailed a great deal of toing and froing, while the meeting was in progress to get everything arranged. The advance party going to Bagnor too had been fully briefed on their urgent mission and had all rushed off in various states of excitement and nervousness to get ready to be on their way. They planned to reach the first way station in the early hours of the morning, sleep for a few hours, and then put in a full day's travelling the following day. After some further discussion, and particularly in view of the advance party going to Bagnor too, it was decided to keep the original numbers for the expedition. This decision was also influenced by the fact that Major Tarek reminded the meeting that a security detail of 10 had gone along with the supply wagons that had been sent off nearly 2 moons before under the leadership of Councillor Padham. "If we need extra people, we can always draw on them," the efficient young major pointed out. The Queen's hope for the expedition to leave before noon the next day could not be realized. There was simply too much to arrange and organize and delegate for this to prove feasible. The departure was, however, set for early the following morning, so that a full day's travelling should prove possible. The Queen appointed Governor Demito as acting regent in her absence, and Councillor Admeta as administrator of the palace while she was away. Dane was absolutely delighted to be asked to join the expedition in the place of Sergeant Narik, who was going with the advance party to Bagnor Deep too. Needless to say, both Anmar and Leonard were delighted to have their reliable threesome restored. One of the last things the Queen did on their final day in the palace was to write a very full and comprehensive report in duplicate to her son, King Dinar. In it she covered every aspect of the upcoming expedition, and included the news about the attack on Bagnor 1 as the main reason for moving it forward. She also summed up all her worst fears and suspicions again, and referred to the action she had proposed before, and reiterated even more cogently the reasons for the said action. The whole report was written in her ingenious private code that they had developed when King Dinar was still a young boy, and had used ever since for their private correspondence. Having sealed both copies securely in 2 special oiled tox lizard skin pouches, she personally handed them over to Anir and Talon, the 2 young couriers who had brought the news from Bagnor 1 at such record speed. Having instructed them to have at least another full day's complete rest before setting off for Belfane, she entrusted them with these crucial documents, having stressed the need for complete secrecy. She suggested that they give the impression that they, at the Queen's personal insistence, were returning to their parents' holiday resort on the shores of Lake Lanatek for a very much overdue vacation, and were rushing in order to be in time for their elder sister's nuptials. And finally, in the tiny shorthand script that she and King Dinar had also developed, and on the thinnest pieces of marsh rice paper, she wrote 3 concise and identical messages. She sealed these in the small isingplex tubes developed for this specific purpose, and personally attached them, as she had so often done before, to the strong legs of 3 beautiful peregrine falcons, personally trained by her son, and released them. As the last one's powerful body caught the late afternoon sun as she sped off in swift pursuit of her 2 sisters, heading off into the west in the direction of Belfane, Queen Eruda hoped fervently that their superior speed would enable all of them to escape the beaks and claws of the big black eagles that inhabited the heights of the North Bagnor Mountains, and that they would reach Belfane and the king safely. She slept that night with an easier mind, knowing that these vital documents had been dispatched. Anmar spent their final night in the palace with Zendra and her puppies, in their nursing cubicle on her light travelling mattress. She woke early after a fairly restless night amidst a tangle of Lhound puppies and their mother. She experienced a tangle of emotions as well, sadness on behalf of herself and Zendra at leaving the puppies, nervousness bordering on fearfulness at what lay ahead, but also a keyed-up sense of anticipation at the possibility of solving the mystery of the Lanatek juvenile Lhounds that had been spirited away, and the missing bamboo tunnels. Leonard and Zand slept deeply and restfully, secure in the confident knowledge of each other's well-tested skills and abilities. Their quiet slumbers would almost certainly have been less serene could they have dreamt of how those skills and abilities would be put to test in the not-too-distant future.